Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump is planning to stock his White House with more than a dozen billionaires and super rich people. As Axios puts it, the president-elect has assembled an administration of unprecedented, mind-boggling wealth. Now, let's be clear here, right? The U.S. is a place where moneyed interests have had incredible leverage and influence for a very long time. In fact, it's been a huge gaping wound in American democracy. But this is different and worse, I think, the worst it's ever been. I mean, Trump has brought in huge amounts of money from a very small amount of people, unprecedented in modern times, including the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who spent $250 million helping to elect Trump. And those rich benefactors have all sorts of private interests. And it's not crazy to imagine they are expecting something in return. For Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, it is the opportunity to slash government spending, including this country's social safety net. Except, presumably, the billions of dollars in federal contracts that Musk's companies get. Now, when people talk about oligarchy in this country, ruled by the wealthiest people, they're often using it in a kind of metaphorical sense. Very rich folks and corporations have a lot more political influence than the rest of us. They manage the agenda on Capitol Hill. But oligarchy under Donald Trump is starting to look much more literal. The billionaires are being given direct access to the levers of state power. Do you think they're going to use that authority to benefit the American public, or are they going to use it to benefit themselves? To that end, Donald Trump just announced he will be appointing venture capitalist and former PayPal exec David Sacks to his White House. You may not be familiar with Sacks. He's very rich, a right-wing South African-born guy who's quite close with the other two very rich right-wing South African guys, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. In fact, back in the 90s, Sacks actually co-wrote a book with Thiel about how diversity is bad, titled The Diversity Myth. And Sacks has been a vocal supporter of Donald Trump, hosting a fundraiser for him at his San Francisco mansion last spring, where some folks paid $300,000 per person. Sacks is now going to be Donald Trump's czar for crypto and AI. Since Trump's election, cryptocurrency holdings have gone through the roof, with the anticipation they will face a far more friendly regulatory environment under Trump. In fact, just yesterday, the value of Bitcoin, a single one, hit $100,000 for the first time. Crypto interests were one of the biggest spenders in this election cycle. They dropped a ton of money for Trump and against crypto-skeptical Democrats, including in primaries, or in this Senate election in Ohio, where they dropped $40 million to oust the crypto-skeptic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And to be clear, I think crypto is interesting. I know a lot of people who own crypto, but there are also perfectly good reasons to be skeptical of cryptocurrency, particularly as a financial instrument integrated into the American financial system. Not the least of being, it's absolutely rife with scams, fraud, grift, and disasters, blow-ups. Just this week, retail investors, regular people, got absolutely wiped out after investing in a failed cryptocurrency from a viral TikTok star. So for very understandable reasons, Democrats and Democratic regulators have worked hard to keep crypto, which has been supremely volatile, blocked off from the rest of financial systems, so that if it crashes, it doesn't bring the entire U.S. economy down with it, requiring a bailout. Some rich people holding a lot of crypto disagree with that strategy. They want a bailout, implicit or explicit, if the house of cards comes crashing down. To that end, after Republicans took back the Senate with the help of money from the crypto industry, they now have a plan to return the favor. And I want you to listen to this part because no one's really talking about this, but the elements of the plot are just there in plain sight. Senate Republicans are working on a bill that would transfer billions and billions of dollars of money from the U.S. government, from taxpayers, and hand it over to a handful of big crypto holders.
We got a present for President Donald Trump. Here it is. This is the Bitcoin Reserve Bill in the Senate of the United States to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve, a network of secure storage vaults, purchase program, and other programs to ensure the transparent management of Bitcoin holdings of the federal government.
Yes, the Bitcoin Act from Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, it would establish a Federal Reserve of Bitcoin. It's truly one of the most audacious schemes I've ever seen in Congress. Here's why. Rich folks who own a lot of crypto have a problem, right? Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular, is a very valuable asset. Single Bitcoin worth over 100 grand. Some very, very wealthy people own hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. David Sachs, for instance, has a lot of crypto. That said, it's not a liquid asset like cash that you can easily spend or invest or use for practical purposes. It has no practical use really outside of a few gimmicks, and it's very useful for criminal cartels. So if you're an investor, you're sitting on this speculative asset. You can't actually do anything with it, but it's worth a lot of money. What's more, if you try to sell it all off, right, to get rid of it, the hordes of Bitcoin on the exchanges, that's going to flood the market and tank the price. So what's the solution? They're going to sell it to the U.S. government.
Over 5 years, the United States will assemble 1 million Bitcoin, 5% of the world's supply, and it will be held for a minimum of 20 years and can be used for one purpose: reduce our debt.
Reduce our debt? You can't pay the debt down in Bitcoin. Are you tracking this? Are you tracking what's being planned and announced in person here, right? The U.S. government handing billions of dollars into the pockets of rich crypto holders? The plan is that the Bitcoin Act would have the government sell off some of its gold reserves, you know, the stuff from Fort Knox, and use the money to buy 1 billion Bitcoin. At current market value, that would cost $100 billion. Now, the actual price would likely be much higher because that market value would almost certainly rise as a result when a new buyer enters the market and boosts the price of the asset the buyer is now legally obligated to buy. This is an enormous heist. They're just backing the truck up to the government in front of all of us. A massive bailout to the crypto world. The opportunity to turn a speculative asset into real cash on your dime. And presumably David Sachs, as the crypto czar, will help usher that plan through. And there is a real irony here. For a long time, as long as I've been covering crypto, which is over a decade, advocates have sold crypto as this libertarian project, right? We don't need government. We don't need banks. We don't need financial intermediaries. We don't need regulation. Here's Sachs himself making that point on a podcast 2 years ago.
There is a huge risk of currency debasement when the government is in control, and particularly when you have the world's reserve currency. There's just such an enormous temptation to print money to finance your budget and to rack up loans that become unpayable. What Bitcoin offers is a different kind of currency where it's not backed by a government, it's backed by math, it's backed by encryption. And so you don't have to trust the government.
All of that lofty rhetoric goes right out the window, though, when Republicans decide they want the government to initiate a massive upward transfer of wealth and bail out the crypto industry. Joining me now is Zeke Fox. He's an investigative reporter for Bloomberg News. He's author of the book Number Go Up: Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall, and maybe Wild Rise again. It's good to have you here. I really enjoy your coverage of this. I've been reading it for a long time, so thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris.
First, let's just start about crypto interests and Trump and what that alliance looked like in the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, during the first Trump presidency, Trump called Bitcoin a scam, and his SEC initiated some of the lawsuits that the crypto industry is still up in arms about. But the Bitcoiners kind of got together, and some of the most powerful holders of Bitcoin realized that if they gave money to Trump, they could get his attention.
And maybe change his mind, which he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a bargain. They raised $25 million for him, and that got him to come down to Nashville, where he gave a speech at the annual Bitcoin convention, which is like almost like a religious revival. It's a crazy scene. And at that convention, he said, I'll fire Gary Gensler, the SEC chairman.
Crypto skeptic.
Yeah, I'll put in someone who's friendly to the industry. And he even said, yeah, if Bitcoin's going to the moon, we're going to lead the way. We're going to have a strategic reserve.
The strategic reserve is key to me because, I mean, we'll talk about what the policy agenda is here, though. But, you know, the Loomis thing is a bill. But there's some people who think that they could use through executive action or things at the Treasury or even the Federal Reserve, if he gets a Fed chairman, to just do this unilaterally without even a bill through Congress.
Right. They've said that the U.S. actually holds a lot of Bitcoins that they've confiscated from the countless crypto criminals.
Yes, who use it for
Yes. Yeah. And so that the U.S. could, instead of auctioning those off, as they do periodically, they could hold them. That could form the basis of the reserve. But, I mean, this is just like a really crazy idea. Like, as you said, the value of Bitcoin is valuable because people want it. It has no inherent value. And to keep this price going up, you need to bring in like bigger and bigger buyers. So for a while recently, that was this Bitcoin ETF that brought in new investors. But imagine whole governments coming in and buying Bitcoin. That's been like the pipe dream of the craziest Bitcoiners for years. They got El Salvador, a small country, to buy in a couple years ago. Everyone thought that was nuts. Now they've got the President of the United States talking about doing it. Even him talking about it is a huge win.
Yeah, this point about, again, there's no practical. There is a practical use for criminal cartels and people that want to hold people for ransom or make transactions and payments away from law enforcement. There's some use case for like dissidents in states that are under repressive regimes to move money around. There's a use case for that. But generally, this is essentially an instrument of pure speculation. It's like Beanie Babies or tulips, right?
Right. I mean, if you're pro Bitcoin, you'd say, hey, it's like gold.
Right.
Gold's been valuable for many years. Why couldn't we have digital gold?
Right.
But their arguments just sort of fall apart when you start to think about, what makes Bitcoin valuable? Why is it more valuable than other cryptocurrencies? Some of the new ones that have been invented are superior in many ways.
And technically,
Yeah, you just have to really believe that this is going to be the one that's always going to be like the special one.
And so in terms of there's a sort of the circle of crypto people around Trump at this point. There's also the fact that like he's gotten into crypto. And you read this story about Justin Sun. This is just a wild thing. Again, no one's been tracking this. He has a crypto coin, right?
Right. So Trump realized an important thing about cryptocurrency, which is that if you want to make money on cryptocurrency, the thing to do is not to buy the one that someone else is promoting. You got to have your own made-up coin.
Yes.
And so just with like weeks to go in the campaign, he started promoting his own coin called World Liberty Financial. And this, even by crypto standards, it's a truly unappealing investment. You can't sell it. It doesn't get any share of the revenue generated by this company. It's unclear what the company does. But 3/4 of the money that you pay for the coins goes straight to Trump. And this guy, Justin Sun, took advantage of that. He's a controversial crypto bro who is facing an SEC lawsuit, and he's China-born. He doesn't come to the U.S. I don't think he could give to the campaign, but by buying $30 million of World Liberty coins, he's giving Trump $23 million right in his pocket.
So this crypto guy, Chinese-born crypto founder, announced he was investing $30 million in these Trump tokens. It pushed the project over the threshold. Trump now stands to collect at least $50 million based on the terms in the sale. So this basically, there was a direct payment to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, anybody can go buy these tokens and give money to Trump. It totally trumps like renting a room at one of his hotels. And actually, I misspoke by saying anyone can buy it. The purchases have actually been restricted because they've been concerned about violating existing SEC rules.
Yeah.
Now, Trump has said, I'm going to loosen those rules. That could make it so that anybody in the U.S. could buy his cryptocurrency.
In terms of that regulatory agenda, my understanding is the SEC under Gensler and Biden has been very skeptical of crypto and has basically also tried to keep it cordoned off from the rest of the financial system so that it doesn't get mixed in, so that if there's a huge crypto crash, it brings down the whole system. That seems like that's on the table now.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So Trump, his pick for SEC chair, Paul Atkins, he is a former Republican SEC commissioner. More recently, he's been a lobbyist. He's lobbied for crypto. I was just listening to an interview with him from last year. He was talking about the FTX collapse, the giant fraud run by Sam Bankman-Fried. Yes. What he said then was that actually the problem was that the rules in the U.S. were too strict. Had they been looser, Sam Bankman-Fried would have followed them and would have been in the U.S. where we could monitor him.
Wow. Zeke Fox, great reporter on this beat that's going to be a very, very important beat in the coming years. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Coming up, police still haven't caught the gunman who killed an insurance CEO outside a Manhattan hotel or even named a suspect. Latest on the manhunt next. It's been nearly 3 days since a gunman shot and killed United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside his hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And as of this hour, the suspect has still not been captured or even identified with the name. Police have said that they have reason to believe their person of interest has left the city. They have pieced together a timeline of his movements. He arrived in the city by bus on November 24th. They have images of him without a mask at a hostel in the Upper West Side where investigators believe he stayed. There is footage that appears to show him approaching the hotel from the subway that morning, as well as images that show him fleeing the scene on an electric bike. New York's chief of detectives also confirmed today they have footage of him getting off that bike and entering a taxi in the Upper West Side that took him to an interstate bus center further uptown in Washington Heights. Yet even with tens of thousands of cameras surveilling New York City, the digital footprint that investigators can follow through cell phones and credit card purchases, it's pretty striking we still don't know the gunman's identity. Mark Claxton's a former detective who served 20 years in the New York Police Department. He's currently director of public relations and political affairs for the Black Law Enforcement Alliance, and he joins me now. Mark, it's good to have you on. I just, obviously, I'm a sort of lay observer of this, but as someone who served in the NYPD and tried to solve crimes, had a career solving crimes, are you surprised that we do not have a name yet for the suspect?
I'm not surprised that the public does not have a name that's been released by these law enforcement professionals. I do have a sneaky suspicion that they have some tentative, or they have identified some individual person of interest, or perhaps a small group of people who they are interested in having conversations with and making contact with. But I'm not surprised at all that at this point of this investigation, which is still unfolding and very active, and the investigators are very engaged in it, that they haven't released to the public an identity or a list of quote unquote suspects, because that would in many ways interfere with the objectivity and integrity of the investigation. As you could well imagine, if they released a name of a person of interest or a suspect, there would be news and sleuths all over the place.
Right.
Trying to get a heads up to make contact with that person or the family members of that person. And that could have really a dangerous and damaging impact on the investigation itself.
I see. So you think it's likely, or at least possible, that there's sort of a lag in terms of what information they're letting out, what they know, and what they're telling the public. Obviously, they have chosen to tell the public a few things. Notably, they've released the photo, presumably because they want the public to help identifying the individual. Also, that detail, which has, I think, captured people's, has caught people's attention about the writing on the shell casings. Deny, depose, discredit. That maybe points to some motive related to United Health Insurance, the health insurance industry. Do you think they're choosing what details to let out so as to preserve the integrity of the investigation?
Absolutely. Every investigation, especially these high-profile investigations, that is the exact course of action for the police department. You want to make sure that you have control of the investigation itself, and persons of interest, or quote-unquote suspects, are not valid offenders until you can verify and validate them. There's a lot of evidence that has to be examined. There's forensic evidence that has to be analyzed. There's a lot of video evidence still coming in. They're still discovering items. There were reports that they discovered a backpack in Central Park at this point. So this is a very active investigation. It's a very dynamic investigation. And they're going to be very careful about what information they release. I think they've released a tremendous amount of information, which indicates to me that they have a boatload of additional information that they have yet to release. And keep in mind also, Chris, the real objective of this type of an investigation is to put it together, create this timeline, apprehend, arrest the perpetrator, and prepare this case for prosecution.
Right.
Not for the glamour of arrest,
right,
to get those names out there. But this is a case you don't want to jeopardize or mess up doing something silly and releasing too much or releasing incorrect information, and that would have a negative impact on the eventual prosecution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We just showed the photo of what appears to be the backpack, or at least a backpack was found in Central Park. I mean, our understanding of the timeline here is there's he got a few power bars and water. There's some talk about maybe getting DNA swabs from some of the places in the hostel or from those from the water that was maybe ditched. There's the backpack that they caught in the that they appear to have found in Central Park. Presumably, they're going to go through that as well, right, and see what's in there. Although at this point, it seems like he's been fairly careful about things like credit cards or cell phones or the obvious digital footprints that you could use to trace someone in this day and age.
Well, you really don't have a clear idea about that. I mean, as much information has been released, you have no idea about what digital footprint this particular individual may be leaving behind, or what they have discovered or uncovered. You don't know about for example, contents of what may be in that book, a backpack, or some other items that may have been recovered as well. So there's a lot that's unknown that I'm sure that the investigators they have a lot of processing to do, really, to wrap this thing up and get it ready for prosecution.
Yeah, on the sort of digital video, how does that work? Like, you have, obviously there's just literally thousands of hours of video throughout the city, right? So are NYPD just going to, door by door local businesses around this area as they trace and getting video footage, and then there's some team that's searching through it to basically sort of stitch together a timeline of him passing through various cameras?
The NYPD utilizes this domain awareness system, which is that there are thousands of cameras that the police department has total control over, those Argus cameras. And then there are also cameras, commercial cameras. They have agreements and arrangements with a lot of the commercial establishments that also provide for that network. That thing is tied into license plate readers and other digital surveillance materials that are out there. So that system is very advanced. It's extensive throughout the city. As a matter of fact, New York City is second only to Chicago in the number of surveillance apparatus that they have on their streets. So it's very difficult, quite frankly, for a person to go undetected throughout the city.
Yes, and yet he seems to have gotten out of the city, at least according to the most recent information we have. Mark Claxton, thank you very much. One of the most alarming, arguably the most alarming of Donald Trump's many alarming picks for his new administration is Kash Patel for FBI director. One of the reasons for that is just the unique history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a place that was in the hands of a paranoid, petty, authoritarian figure for decades. J. Edgar Hoover, the man whose name still graces the headquarters of the FBI, led the Bureau until his death in 1972, and he used his position to persecute anyone on his enemies list.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left.
The documents prove for the first time that the FBI undertook a program in 1968 to harass and destroy New Left political organizations whose views the federal police agency disagreed with. Director Hoover detailed the setup of the program, saying anarchists and revolutionists had to be neutralized if law and order and a civilized society were to survive.
Just to be clear, these so-called anarchists and revolutionists who Hoover targeted included women's rights groups, civil rights activists, protesters against the Vietnam War, famously Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover's abuses of power were so bad, there was a concerted effort to try to essentially Hoover-proof the FBI. Once he died, one of the ways that was done was giving the FBI directors 10-year terms. Hoover had been there for basically half a century. Donald Trump already broke that norm when he fired FBI Director James Comey in his first term. It was a big scandal for a reason. And now he wants to do it again, firing the current FBI Director, Christopher Wray, who he himself appointed to install Kash Patel 3 years before the end of Wray's term. Kash Patel, a man who has already put together and published an enemies list. Tim Weiner is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of Enemies, A History of the FBI. James Risen, also a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, senior national security correspondent for The Intercept, and the author of The Last Honest Man, the CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys, and One Senator's Fight to Save Democracy. They both join me now. I feel like I could talk to both of you for hours on this topic. You're an incredible repository of knowledge and expertise. Let me just start with, I'll start with you, James. How your knowledge of the history and the darkest chapters in the FBI inform how you think about this appointment of Patel and the railroading and sidestepping of one of the main sort of post-Hoover reforms, the 10-year term, to try to insulate it from the kind of personal grudges of the president.
Well, I think that there's one significant difference between J. Edgar Hoover and Kash Patel and Donald Trump. Hoover was he was a paranoid and delusional who was caught up in conspiracy theories about race primarily, but he was always using the FBI for his own personal power and for the power of the FBI. He saw the FBI as his own personal fiefdom, and he was not using the FBI at the behest of any particular president. Right. The difference now will be that Kash Patel wants to use the FBI at the behest of a president and as his tool. And that's a significant difference between what Hoover did. Hoover really was never in the pocket of any specific president. He had some close relationships with individual presidents, and he also had serious fallings out with presidents. Most famously, he sort of tried to blackmail John F. Kennedy. Yes. But his goal was always the expansion of J. Edgar Hoover's power, right, not the power of a president. And I think that could be a major difference.
What do you think, Tim?
Hoover's enemies list was the left, essentially. Also journalists, people on the National Security Council who he thought were leakers. Donald Trump's enemies list and Kash Patel's enemies list is not the left, it's the center. On that list, and there is one, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, right, Chris Wray, the current director of the FBI, the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. These folks want to essentially prosecute people like Obama, Biden, for treason. Donald Trump wants them prosecuted for treason, an offense punishable by death.
One of the things that came through in the sort of post-Hoover era, James, and you have a book about the Church Committee, which was just one of these moments of reckoning, of course, was just the rot that people were willing to do the things that Hoover had them do. I mean, if you're a bureau agent and you're sitting there putting together the letter to MLK with the gun to try to get him to shoot himself, right? I mean, it should be crossing your head that what I'm doing is flagrantly illegal and unconstitutional. Are you confident that the culture of the Bureau has changed such that people there would not go for that kind of thing should Patel attempt, or anyone under Trump attempt those kinds of abuses?
I think that's the $64 question. We don't know the answer to that. And I think one of the problems is in the first Trump administration, we talked all the time about can the government stop Trump? And I think after a second term, it's going to be much harder than it was in the first term. I think it's becoming much more difficult to find people who are willing to stand up to Trump and to this onslaught against regular order, against the rule of law, against democracy.
I'm curious because obviously one of the ways he manipulated the FBI was the incredible personal loyalty to him and his loyalty to the FBI, right? So it wasn't like he was declaring war on the FBI the way that Patel says. He wants to fire everyone who works at the headquarters. And I wonder, Tim, if you think that provides a bit of a check or will stymie the worst, most sort of authoritarian impulses.
Kash Patel will do anything Trump tells him to do. Patel has said on his first day he wants to essentially evacuate FBI headquarters, send everybody out to the 50 states, and turn the headquarters into a museum of the deep state. Trump is now empowered by the Supreme Court, which ruled in July that he cannot ever be prosecuted for crimes he commits as president. He can order Patel, for example, to use the FBI as an instrument of political warfare, just as Hoover did, to prosecute anyone he chooses and to spy on Americans without fear of running afoul of the Constitution or the law.
I mean, it would run afoul of the Constitution. The questions of accountability. I mean, it's important to me to sort of reiterate the fact that, like,
there is still a Constitution.
The Constitution does still exist, right? Yes, the Constitution does still exist, whether they want to ignore or not. James Risen and Tim Weiner, it's great to have you here. I want to play one last bit here of Senator Frank Church and his warning, because I think one of my contentions about our era, particularly, is the memory of fascism has abated. People having to be reacquainted with the lessons from it. I think the lessons of this era, of the Hoover era, are also fading in memory. Here's what Frank Church had to say about the threat, essentially, of authoritarianism here in the U.S. Take a listen.
I don't want to see this country ever go across the bridge. I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America. And we must see to it that this agency and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss. That's the abyss from which there is no return.
The Senator was talking about the CIA there, James, but I imagine that Frank Church, were he alive today, would have a lot of warnings for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that people keep calling for another church committee. And I think we're going to need one in about 4 years.
Yeah, or sooner. Tim Weiner, James Risen. Thank you, gentlemen, both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, spent yesterday on Capitol Hill being celebrated by Republicans who gave off the vibe that Musk's budget-slashing, workforce-purging agenda is their agenda. It's going to be the agenda of the new Congress. He walked around Capitol Hill, frankly, like he owned the place. Related to that, we have new details on his campaign spending. Elon Musk spent $250 million to elect Donald Trump this year, much of it donated in the last weeks of the campaign, so it wouldn't come out until after the election. That's the way this reporting works. It's an insane amount of money. But look at the returns. Investors are suddenly very bullish on Musk's companies. He's been hanging around at Mar-a-Lago, weighing in on hiring decisions, joining a call between Trump and the Ukrainian president for some reason. He's been called co-president by some in Trump world. And today, multiple outlets are reporting the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, recently called Elon Musk in hopes of getting the incoming U.S. administration to reopen talks for the release of hostages in Gaza. You would think that's the sitting president's job, Joe Biden, who's still president of the United States for another month and a half, or if not him, then the incoming president's job, Donald Trump, who was duly elected. Shouldn't be the job of his top campaign donor that no one elected. What are we doing here? This is insane. It's precisely what advocates of campaign finance reform warned would happen in a post-Citizens United world. So while Musk is basically running the presidential transition, where exactly is the president-elect, the oldest man ever elected in the history of the Republic? It was clear on the campaign trail Trump has lost a step or two, and that makes sense. He's, almost 80. Since then, he's mostly hung out and golfed at Mar-a-Lago. He did finally get out of the house yesterday for a very important event to receive an honorary Patriot of the Year award on Fox Nation. Maybe Trump doesn't have the actual energy to do the job. Maybe letting Elon Musk basically conduct diplomacy, talk to Hill lawmakers while Trump collects awards from his fans is the division of labor that Trump can handle. Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sits on the House Oversight Committee. She also represents a district in the state of Texas, Elon Musk's new base of operations, and she joins me now. What do you make of this figure that we have never really had in the time that I've covered American politics? The richest man in the world with no public role officially, no accountability, not Senate confirmed or anything, running a kind of off-the-book operation in the name of the president he spent $250 million to elect, who has a million conflicts and seems to be like sort of calling the shots.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I am just as lost as you are. When Elon decided that he was going to be on the trail and he was running around and jumping around on the stage and that kind of stuff, I mean, it was clear that he was fully in to make sure that he could support him. He had announced that he was going to spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. We didn't know that it would get all the way to $250 million. But honestly, I thought that this was really a lot more of the pay for play, right? It's the pay for play that Donald Trump has consistently offered to those oil tycoons and anybody else that had a lot of money and was willing to put it behind him. You put it behind me and I will give you something in return. return. So we know that he's got these federal contracts. And I just assumed that it was about that. I had no idea that he would then end up with this random position with a new randomly created organization, and now that he would be sitting and doing the diplomacy that really should be left to the president-elect of the United States.
You are in a state where, and I've heard this from multiple folks that cover Texas politics, that Musk really has the Texas Capitol quite wired. This is the Houston Chronicle writing about this, that he's betting Trump will also make most of the 20 federal investigations into his companies disappear. He probably is looking to benefit from state contracts and the 17 agencies that have generated $3 billion in revenue last year, but also that he's kind of used the Texas State House as a bit of a laboratory for accruing political influence.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the Supreme Court decision as it relates to our federal elections. Let me tell you, in the state of Texas, we have no campaign finance limits at all, right? And so what we have is a governor who has been elected more times than anybody else, because we also don't have a term limit on our governor. So we are stuck with Abbott, because every time he gets in trouble, he calls up somebody that he's going to help out, and he say, I need another $1 million. Listen, for those of you that went out and voted and thought that you were going to vote for somebody that was going to be for you, let me tell you, Trump is showing you exactly who he is for. He is for the people that put up the real dollars, not your $5 or your $2. He is for the people that put up the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't really know where that leaves the rest of us. I can tell you that in the state of Texas, it has not left us in a good place.
There are a number of Democrats who have either committed to working with this weird, again, off-book operation. I don't even know what to call it, Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a department. Right now it's just a string of letters. It's just two guys. Jared Moskowitz, who's a colleague of yours in Florida, who's a Democrat, I think is working with it in some official capacity. Ro Khanna, who's a congressman from California in Silicon Valley, says he wants to get involved with it. What do you think about Democrats saying, hey, yeah, look, we should be open-minded here and maybe work with these two individuals to slash wasteful government spending?
Listen, I don't know what's happening. I mean, I do know that Jared did join this caucus. And a caucus is different from an actual committee. So I have no idea. You know, right now we don't have our committee assignments. So I don't know who's going to serve on what committee. I will tell you that they did decide that they were going to have a subcommittee on oversight for DOJ. And it is going to be led by none other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So it'll be interesting to see who becomes the ranking member on that subcommittee. And when we start to talk about the committee work, then yes, that is actual work of the House. And whoever is assigned to work on oversight and assigned to that subcommittee, then they will start to do the work. But oversight in and of itself exists to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. That is our job, and we oversee every single agency, and that is what we are supposed to be doing. But what they are proposing right now, from the likes of Ramaswamy, talking about getting rid of 70% of the workforce, well, let me tell you, everybody that has complained about how behind their passports were, or their Social Security checks being messed up, or their IRS checks not arriving on time, well, let me tell you, something is about to happen, and it doesn't sound like it's anything good if we are going to reduce the workforce instead of increasing it and giving them the resources that they need. And mind you, the people that claim that they were voting because they were feeling a way about the border and it being overrun, the border has been underfunded too. So I don't know how you're going to kick everybody out of this country like they are proposing to do, while at the same time reducing the workforce.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, thank you so much.